brand new World Hockey Championship rivals the National Hockey how they joined the NHL was them. They had a merger with them along with the whole Alright, hi guys. I'm making the first of my YouTube channel. This is the first episode of the PSN channel. I'm obviously Petros Masha hosting this channel, obviously. So now we're going to, as I said, the PSN is going to be talking about various things that are going around in the world of sports. And of course, I've been doing like Rise and Fall series and whatnot. And today, as I said, for the first episode, we're going to do a Rise and Fall. I couldn't put this on my Facebook page 2 years ago, so I'm going to do it on my YouTube page because the Facebook video was at least over half an hour long. And now we're going to talk about the rise and fall of the Montreal Canadiens, you see right here. The most storied franchise in the National Hockey League. I'm not going to say too much about the history from the earlier part because the earlier part, it's very long. And I don't think you guys are going to be too bored out, but anyway. The team was founded on December the 4th, 1909, the same day the first Grey Cup was played by J. Ambrose O'Brien. And it's really hard to imagine that an Anglo came up with this name, or founded the most storied franchise in the National Hockey League. So after he founded the franchise, and they had their their brief ups and downs and whatnot, and but next thing you know, they got into a bit of financial trouble after he took over. And the problem was after he took over. After he left, the team was, as it was said, they weren't doing too well. They were rumored that they were going to move to Cleveland until Dick Irvin Sr. Took over as the head coach. Obviously, everyone remembers Dick Irvin Jr. for being the color commentator on Hockey Night in Canada on CBC, and of course, color play-by-play whenever. But oftentimes, just paired up with either Danny Gallivan, Chris Cuthbert, Bob Cole, and Harry Neal. They used to do the three up until I think 97 or 98 when Detroit won their first of back-to-back cups. Anyway, so he took over the franchise, and next thing you know, they started to get better and started playing better as a team. But mind you, Montreal played in a league with only 6 teams in the league, the original 6, where you had Montreal, you had Toronto, then you had New York Rangers, Boston Bruins, Chicago Blackhawks, and the Detroit Red Wings. So they were always dominant, and of course, Montreal was given the right to draft the top 2 French Canadians for their franchise. So that's why they had the likes of Richard and Beliveau and Cournoyer and Moore and all these players. And now I'm trying to moving around here, 20s, 30s, and 40s. Then they were winning all the time. Even in the 50s, they won 5 in a row. And no team, the Islanders did come close, winning, going to the finals 5 in a row, winning 4 in a row, and then they lost to Edmonton in '84. Now, eventually, as the '60s wore down, and they were still, winning at will, and they were doing what they were still winning. They still had the likes, Belleville was still playing up until '71, and whatnot. But then when 1970 came around, 19 that's the year they missed the playoffs the first time in a long time, after the New York Rangers had to win by 8 goals and they won, and the Canadiens lost after Claude Ruel tried to pull the goalie with it was like 5 or 4 minutes left, and then Chicago just kept scoring. And then eventually 1970 came around, the year the Sabres and the Canucks were brought into the league. The universal draft for drafting top 2 French Canadians was yanked, meaning they were not allowed. They didn't have that right anymore. Therefore, had that rule still been here today, Canadiens would have had Lemieux. They would have had Gilbert Perreault in 1970, as he was drafted by the Buffalo Sabres. There probably would have never been a French connection with him, René Robert, and Rick Martin. Rick Martin just passed away recently. May he rest in peace. And they wouldn't have, as I said, Mario Lemieux, Le Cavalier would have been on there. I'm not sure about St. Louis, because most teams did not want him, unless if you're Calgary or Tampa Bay. And they could have had Denis Savard, but they screwed up on that. I'm going to mention that a bit later on. Anyway, now the '70s came around, and then they won. After missing playoffs, they win the Cup in '71. Then they lose. They don't win in '72. It was won by the Bruins, and then '73 Montreal wins, and then '74, '75 was Philadelphia. And then from '76 onward, they have another dynasty again. Mind you, beforehand, in 1971, there was a California Golden Seals were one of the worst teams. So Sam Pollock traded, got lured somehow, managed to get the first overall pick from that roster. But next thing you know, he was going to lose it. So he traded Ralph Backstrom, who was an aging veteran, but he could still score, to Los Angeles, and yet he somehow secured that first overall pick. And it was a debate between I was thinking his brother, Marcel Dion, and Guy Lafleur. And next you know, Sam Pollock chose Guy Lafleur over Marcel Dion. Dion had a terrific career, even though he was with Detroit, and Detroit was a morbid franchise for a long time before they drafted Steve. Anyway, they drafted him over Dion, and then Dion eventually, he never won a couple. Lafleur ended up being the Canadiens' all-time leading scorer. And obviously number 10 is retired. If you go to the Bell Center, you will see Guy Lafleur's number 10 in the rafters. Now, okay, now he was like the flower. He was terrific. He did everything he could. Now the '80s come around. The Canadiens somehow, they're not really the powerhouse they were in the '70s. Yet, because you have the Islanders that are dominating the league, then you have the Oilers. But somehow in 1986, an unheralded rookie who was drafted in the 3rd round, Patrick Waugh. He's now the head coach of Colorado, who he eventually played with. Get to that later. He pretty much came out in the middle of nowhere and practically stole the Stanley Cup against Calgary. Mind you, Edmonton did not go to the final thanks to an own goal by Steve Smith, which was an unlucky break against Calgary in the rounds previous. And then obviously they went to the finals again in '89, and then they lost to Calgary. And the Calgary Flames are the only team to win the Stanley Cup at the Forum Ice during this. So, the '80s are coming around. Now the '90s are there. They still have, like quality players on their roster. You had Stéphane Richer and Mats Naslund. Stéphane Richer is the last player to score 50 goals for the Canadiens. And next thing you know, they're still competitive. And you get guys like Kirk Muller and Vincent D'Anfous, and Carbonneau's still around, and you still have Patrick Waugh. And they were beat by the Boston Bruins, who were led by the greatest hab killer of all time in nets, Andy Moog. They in '93, after their 4 years not being in the finals, not their last final appearance, they played. They were down 2-0 against the Nordiques, and then next thing you know, they come back and they managed to win four. They managed to win 4 straight games against Quebec. They sweep the Sabres, and then they beat the Islanders in 5-4 to go to the final against the LA Kings. And mind you, they won. And in that run, when they won the Stanley Cup, they won 10 overtime games in a row. That's a record that will probably never be broken in the National Hockey League. because Patrick Waugh was unbelievable and they relied on that clutch scoring, and then they won their 24th and last Stanley Cup. That seems like a distant memory now, because that was the rise, the glory years of the Montreal Canadiens. Now, the year after, they lose in Game 7 of the Boston Bruins in the first round. Patrick Waugh had his appendectomy, but he played unbelievable, and Patrick Waugh was Patrick Waugh. 94-95 was the second of the 4 lockouts. Mind you, only 48 games were played, similar to the 2012-2013 season. But the Canadiens missed the playoffs for the first time in 25 years. And then they struggled the year after, 95-96. Now we're getting in the fall now. They fired both GM Serge Savard and Jacques Demers and replaced him with Régent Hull, who was nicknamed the Peanut, and I'll explain why, and Mario Tremblay, a former player. This Canadiens somehow managed, but is December the 2nd, 1995, in a game against Detroit Red Wings at the Forum, Patrick Waugh did not have one of his best games. He was shellacked. And after the first period, I think it was 5-4 or 5-1 for Detroit. And Mario Tremblay decided to leave him in there. Just leave Patrick Waugh in there and humiliate him. He was pulled eventually after the 9th goal. Detroit won 11-1 that night, but after the 9th goal, okay, he gets so frustrated that he walks over to the president, Ronald Court, said it's his last game as a Canadian. And next thing you know, it was his last game, because a few days later, him, along with Mike Keane, were traded to Colorado for Andrei Kovalenko, Jocelyn Thibault, and Martin Rucinski. And I have to tell you, that was one of the most lopsided trades in the history of the National Hockey League, because Patrick Waugh won 2 more cups. He would end up winning the cup in '96, that same year, with Colorado, and then won in 2001. And next thing you know, they made those stupidities, and Canadiens started going down the toilet, because yes, they made the playoffs in '96, but they lost after being up 2 games to none. They lost the last 4 to the New York Rangers. '97 they lost in 5 to the Devils. '98 they won their first playoff series since '93 against Pittsburgh, and they had Andy Moog in nets, who used to be with the Bruins. But next thing you know, they get swept by Buffalo. Then '99, 2000, 2001 they missed the playoffs for 3 years. And they were always struggles. But mind you, Régent Hull kind of damaged that franchise, because if you had kept Patrick Waugh, he would have had guys like Vincent D'Anfous, Pierre Turgeon, Marc Recchi, and if you had those 3 guys, you had 3 quality players on your roster. Recchi and Turgeon will probably be in the Hall of Fame. Recchi for sure. D'Anfous probably, but you had those 3 quality players on your team, and you have an up-and-coming Saku Koivu, and yet you do nothing, and you trade those 2 guys, and even poor drafting choices, like you choose Eric Chouinard over Simon Gagner. Simon Gagner has had a better career. Nobody remembers Eric Chouinard, and everyone complains that Daniel Briere didn't want to come to Montreal. We don't blame him, because they could have drafted him, and they chose Matt Higgins. No one knows Matt Higgins. And then they could have had him for virtually nothing when the Coyotes put him on waivers. And then he starts doing well in Buffalo, and the next thing you know, oh, we want him, but he doesn't want to come, and you boo him. No, he's right to not come. Even though he's from Gatineau, Quebec, he's still, he's entitled to his own opinion, Daniel Briere. And on top of that, we could even had Marian Hossa, who dominated with the Sens, with the Thrashers, with the Pens briefly, and then Detroit for that 1 year. Now Chicago. But you can always thank Régent Hull for that. But now the 2000s come around, and they somehow in 2002 make the playoffs thanks to Jose Theodore playing unbelievable. But then he started collapsing the year after. Then he bounced back in 03-04 when they made the playoffs and beat Boston after being down 3-1. That was the first time that they ever rallied from 3-1 in their history to beat. And mind you, it's against the Boston Bruins, the storied franchise. Montreal's done it twice in their history against Boston and Washington in 2010, led by another goaltending performance by Yaroslav Halak. And but I'm saying in that time, had they done proper drafting, yes, they drafted Andrei Markov, but he was drafted over Pavel Datsyuk, but we wouldn't have known. But the Canadiens needed Markov more than they would have needed Pavel Datsyuk. It would have been terrific to have one of the best defensive forwards in the league, but they needed a D-man more. And at the same time, the Canadiens now, in that time. Now they're slowly kind of building, but it was still kind of a flop because they did, they drafted Chris Higgins in 2001. He's now with the Canucks, and he's mostly like a third line guy. Komisarek is probably going to get bought out in Toronto. He was drafted in 2000. So actually, I'm like, the Kostitsyn brothers. In 2003 especially, he could have had Richards, Getzlaff, Corey Perry, Zach Parise, Dion Phaneuf, but he chose Andrei Kostitsyn. He's now in the Russian league, in the KHL. You could have had one of those guys. And then and even worse in 06, you draft David Fisher over Claude Giroux. And where's David Fisher? But you know Claude Giroux. And then 07, you draft McDonough and Pacioretty. If you had kept those two, but you traded McDonough for Scott Gomez, that's a real smart trade if I were Bob Gainey. I'm being sarcastic. So now the Canadiens, mind you though, that same draft, they did draft PK Subban, who just recently won the Norris Trophy. So they're slowly, now with Marc Bergevin, but before he took his predecessor, who was Pierre Gauthier in the Bob Gainey regime, it wasn't like Pierre Gauthier kind of did things mistakenly. Like he traded Spacek, an expiring contract, for Cabriolet, and now if Cabriolet gets bought out, now I'm getting modern now because I just said the fall, but now if you say the modern perspective, Cabriolet I think has a year left on his contract, but if you had kept Spacek and if you had traded him afterward, because his contract was expiring, you would have had more cap space. You wouldn't have to worry about that. You would have still had one of your compliance buyouts. You obviously used your other one on Gomez, but now it's the same dilemma that the New York Rangers have because they used theirs already on Redden. So it's Marc Bergevin had inherited the mess. He's kind of clearing it up a bit now because he traded Eric Cole, which was a big contract with cap is shrinking for Michael Ryder. And Michael Ryder's not coming back next year, even though he did his second tour of duty with the Canadiens during the lockout shortened season. So, he has that nucleus there. He inherited some great pieces, and he knows what he knows what he's doing. You just got to give him time on this one. Yes, we can say he made a mistake on the Desharnais signing, but you know what? Bergevin probably has a better, fresher mind than both Gauthier and Gainey. Even though Bob Gainey did win a Stanley Cup with the Dallas Stars as a GM, and he was considered to be the greatest defensive forward to play in the National Hockey League. But when he was a GM with Dallas, mind you, he was able to get talent like Brett Hall and Joe Nieuwendyk. Like, mind you, he did trade a rookie to get Joe Nieuwendyk. It was Jerome McGinley, who ended up having a storied career with Calgary and now playing with Pittsburgh in the twilight of his career, so he won a Stanley Cup. But as of now I was getting off track now with Bergevin now coming in. He came over last year. He still has a lot of work cut out for him, but it's clear that he's going to do his best to turn the Montreal Canadiens into a container, and so hopefully we can have a rise, fall, and then another rise. This was the first video of the PSN. It's the rise and fall. I'm Petros Masha saying so long. Make sure to read my blogs I write on the internet, petrosmashasports.blogspot.com, and I hope to see you again next time, and peace.